Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
And joining us is our friend and fellow podcaster, Dr. Taylor Marshall. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Good. I'm sure there isn't anyone watching who hasn't heard of you or watched your work or read your books, but just in case there is that one person or two people who might not have done, let's bring this up and direct people to your website, because you have a lot to offer there, including, Taylor, you are doing a talk through an introduction to the traditional Latin Mass, so that people don't feel too excluded or that they don't feel able to take part. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a great online course at the New St. Thomas Institute. You can find it over at taylormarshall.com or go to nsti.com. It's teach you all the Latin responses, how to pronounce them, what they mean for the lay people, and then just to walk through the entire traditional Latin Mass, and then also courses on the history and the development of the Roman Rite. I don't know if there's anything else out there like this, and a lot of our students have been really impressed and have learned a lot, and I think it helps in the call for active participation to learn more about the Roman Rite and how to properly respond and know what's going on. So I'd encourage people to go to New St. Thomas Institute or nsti.com to learn more. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So we'll put a link in at the end of the show as well, so you can go and check that out. We've got a few people in already, and we've got some hellos from Texas, and great having you here. And that's exactly what we think. Thank you, Dave. How to? Okay. So Taylor, you're just back from Rome. Is that right? And you were speaking with a cardinal. You mentioned this on your recent broadcast yesterday. So do you want to tell us about your time in Rome?
Yeah, it was, I had planned to go during the conclave and even had an Airbnb all set up. And then I decided last minute not to go. And I wish I had gone. And then some friends of ours were going to go, and I mentioned it to my wife, and she's like, let's go to Rome. Let's go see Pope Leo. So we went. We were able to go to 3 audiences. We got very close to Pope Leo. I did not meet Pope Leo, but I did talk to a lot of people in Rome and kind of got the feeling from those that I spoke with that there's a great sense of relief, from the lowest ranks to the highest ranks, that this is a positive moment. I think everyone, and I think all 4 of us would agree that we're still waiting. It's just been over a month of the pontificate of Pope Leo XIV. But I think there's generally optimism. And I'll tell you, I was shocked by the crowds. The crowds were huge. Sometimes even an hour to get into St. Peter's. I've been to Rome 8 times. I've never seen anything like this. So there are a lot of people. And I noticed that particularly a lot of Europeans were there. I think they decided to make holiday and go to Rome. So, of course, lots of other nations, but there was a lot of Europeans in Rome. I think that had a lot to do with the crowds. People wanted to lay eyes on the new Pope. And, I'm still optimistic. And I listened to what the Holy Father said. Of course, he was speaking in English quite a bit, which was a nice change for me, at least. And he gave all of the ceremonial parts for the audiences in Latin, and the talks he gave, the messages he gave, I thought were good and strong. One of them in particular was very focused on Jesus Christ. Very, very evangelical, very strong, Christological. So I'm optimistic. I know some of the appointments have us scratching our head, but we'll see what happens in the months to come.
That's very much your view as well, isn't it, Mark? Taylor, you speak about all this pill taking, red pill, white pill, black pill, and you're taking that approach at the moment. Let's just wait and see. And I think that's the view that we take. We're pleased to see the end of the Francis pontificate ambiguous, and news yesterday that revealed that deception over Traditionis Custodes. But Mark, you'd agree with that approach?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of this talk that we want him to do to tear up Traditionis Custodes or whatever immediately. But if he's got any sense whatsoever, I think he'll be a little bit more diplomatic than that, don't you, Taylor? He's got 20, 25, 30 years. So He's got plenty of time to roll these things out gently, so as he doesn't alienate people the way that Francis did, really.
I think that's correct. I think he's a young pope. He's 69. And like you said, he has a 20, perhaps got a 20-year pontificate. And, you look back at Pope Bennett XVI, he didn't roll out Summorum Pontificum within the first 2 months of his pontificate. I think, honestly, the most pressing issue for Pope Leo is examining the curia, examining those who are working in the Vatican and trying to not be deceived by the snakes and trying to figure out, how do I put together a cabinet of men that I can trust moving forward? I imagine that's probably going to be the priority for the first 6 months, not issuing motu proprios, on day 50. So yeah, I'm optimistic. And I think the news from yesterday, which we'll discuss today, I think that's a really big moment. It reveals that Pope Francis, and I'm referring to the Diane Montagna leak of the report of the bishops. What happened is in 2000, Pope Francis sent a questionnaire out to bishops, and he asked them their perspective and their experience in dealing with the traditional Latin Mass and traditional Latin Mass communities. That report came back, or those questionnaires came back and were put into a report that was generally very optimistic. It called for no changes to Summorum Pontificum. It noted the increase in vocations for the traditional Latin Mass communities, which was somewhat of an alarm for diocesan bishops, as you might imagine. The whole document, there's 7 points that Diane Montagna summarized in. It's all glowingly positive. And yet we had Pope Francis issue an accompanying document to Traditionis Custodes, in which he said he consulted the bishops, and the bishops, what they told him about the traditional Latin Mass in the community caused him alarm, and he was urged to intervene, his words, intervene, and issued Traditionis Custodes, which is a draconian, tyrannical document that interrupts the natural parochial life of people all over the world who want to worship the Holy Trinity with the traditional Latin Mass. So the narrative that we got during Traditionis Custodes in the aftermath, now, if this document is legitimate, it brings into question what Pope Francis told us. Did he receive positive feedback and then say he received negative feedback and then wrote this, I would say, dangerous motu proprio? This cast a shadow on the pontificate of Pope Francis. And I think the big question, that was yesterday's story. I think today's story is, who leaked it? Somebody waited a little bit over 1 month after Pope Francis passed and leaked the document. And now there's going to be damage control. And I think it does raise a great moment for Pope Leo to maybe correct things, because the public perception is this was a dishonest move and it hurt a lot of people. And the reasons for doing it are now suspect.
Yeah, because it concluded with, let the people decide. The seminaries are bursting at the seams of the traditional Mass, and that young people are attending and new converts. And so that it's hard to read that and then square that with Traditionis Custodes. It doesn't add up at all, does it?
I don't know what it's like where you are, Taylor, or what your experience is or your knowledge base for the whole of the US. I mean, obviously we've been to the US quite a bit, but I know, talking to priests and being involved with diocesan things at this end, it's a lot worse, I think, even than people think it is, if you know what I mean. The actual reality on the ground of the secular priesthood. I mean, it over here, it's virtually unsustainable and difficult to see how they're going to move through another 10 years, even in terms of the lack of vocations, the lack of money, the people not, no one's coming. This really is a failed project on all levels. And there's several young men that I know who are considering a vocation at the moment, and the diocese is trying to talk them into the secular priesthood. And all the conversations I'm having, obviously, is, go to the orders. If we do that, we'll be returning to a historical precedent, really. You could see a time in England where the secular priesthood died out, and that it was all down to the orders to come in and re-evangelize the diocese. Is that something that you identify with in the States?
Honestly, I don't, because my perception in the United States is that the majority of the religious orders are actually more progressive than the diocesan priests.
Oh,
My
really?
experience with the diocesan priests, there's many solid, good priests in the diocesan structure, where you have some orders, and like, for example, there are good Jesuits, but the Jesuits in the United States of America, of which there are many, they're very progressive. And I don't think there's a lot of hope in, I think in the United States, the Dominicans are conservative and strong, but many of the religious orders are also lacking in vocations and are extremely progressive. I'm recording today on my farm near Tyler, Texas, and Bishop Strickland used to be here, as you know Bishop Strickland, and he's a friend. I've obviously spent a lot of time with him. And here in this diocese, there were 5 parochial traditional Latin masses and the Fraternity of St. Peter, and all 5 of those were canceled after they dismissed Bishop Strickland. And that shows, I think, in this diocese, you had at least 5 diocesan priests who were weekly celebrating the traditional Latin Mass for people who wanted it. And one of the lists of crimes against Bishop Strickland for dismissing him from this diocese was that he didn't properly implement Traditionis Custodes. In other words, there were 5 parochial traditional Latin Mass, and Bishop Strickland just says, the people are edified, the priests are edified, the communities are growing, we have tons of vocations, I'm going to leave them be. And when the visitors came, the auditors came, they faulted him for this. And now what we have in this diocese is all the traditionalists who are going to those 5 parochial Latin masses are all squeezed into a tiny fraternity parish. And this is a rural diocese. People are driving hour, 2 hours to come to mass. And again, this has no accompaniment, no pastoral sensitivity, no smelling of the sheep. This is a decree that came down from Rome to make strong decisions on the governance of the diocese, apparently for a false pretense that we just found out yesterday. So I think it's impacting. We've seen it in North Carolina. Yesterday, they brought an end to traditional Latin masses in the diocesan level at Detroit. So I think in America, especially since Summorum Pontificum, the strength of traditional Catholicism has a very strong root in the diocesan structure. That might be unique to the American experience. Whereas I don't see the traditional movement that strong in the mainstream religious orders.
It is. It's growing in France, isn't it, Mark, and in other parts of Europe. But yes, in the report from Dan Montagna, are also we hear that seminarians were encouraged to learn both rites, and the very opposite happened. So those ordained after 21, or 18, 21, cannot say the traditional Latin Mass. So it's been quite shocking, I think. But as you say, the big thing to look out for now is what next? What as a result of this? What will happen?
I think there was like some ideologues who stifled it, even at the point of Summorum Pontificum. I certainly heard from some seminarians that they weren't allowed to learn it, even though it was now open to them to learn. So there were certainly, I think, some seminaries that were trying to stop the spread of it. And I mean, in America, it's interesting to hear that Strickland, for example, was persecuted for it, whereas we've got other dioceses where they've applied for an extension, and that extension now by Leo is being granted, even though this is meant to be the end of it now, isn't it? And it's all meant to be petering out according to Traditionis Custodes. So there already seems to be a change in attitude from Pope Leo in terms of extending it. But more importantly, it seems that the individual bishops, it's about ideology, isn't it, Taylor? It's like you know, the bishops who wanted to persecute it and put an end to it, they're the ones who pushed it forward. And it seems that Bishop Strickland is an outlier in a way, that other bishops got away with what he's doing and continue to get away with it, and yet he was sort of singled out and attacked.
Yeah, and I want to add something to that. The experience in the Diocese of Tyler with Bishop Strickland, which was if you want to say the traditional Latin Mass and people want it, go for it. That's great. That's very rare, even in America, where you just have a carte blanche, freedom of traditional Latin Mass. My question is, what if bishops took that approach in every diocese in the United States of America? I suspect you would have at least 5 traditional Latin Mass diocesan parishes in every diocese. There is a demand for it. There is a want for it. And one of the things that somewhat troubled the bishops in that report, I would say it's probably the only negative thing that I saw in the report, is that bishops lamented that young men were going to the traditional orders like Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, to receive seminary training and holy orders, and not through the diocesan structure. And I think Pope Francis made that worse. If you're a young man who's from, the local diocese and you want to stay there and you want to minister to those people, and you're told you will never be able to learn or celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, and that's something important to you, you're not going to seek orders in that diocese. And that's one, I would say, probably well-formed man who you just lost. And now you have more of a vocations problem. And it's like, thank you very much, Pope Francis. You just exasperated the problem.
Well, and even to the point where if you were prepared to give up your life to serve the people of Christ, to be servants of the flock, and Pope Francis was not clear on anything, prevaricating, undermining people, attacking priests and seminarians, who's going to give up their life for that? I think that was, so if you're going to do it, you might as well do it properly and go for the ICKSP or the FSSP. And that was, we keep referring to this point that was made in the original report, which was that as far as I remember, the Italian bishops basically were moaning that they had no vocations because everyone was going to Florence, to the ICKSP in Florence. And who can blame them, frankly?
Yeah. Quite. We have a crisis of leadership. Over here, Taylor, we've just had a case where a priest, I don't know if you've been following over here, we've had 2 votes recently. One is on abortion up to birth, infanticide then, and assisted suicide. So it looks likely that these will go through. They have to go through the House of Lords, but they've gone through Parliament. And the sad thing is, a number of Catholic MPs, they call themselves Catholic, and they've not just proposed, tabled, and then supported these bills. And one such MP recently, Chris Coughlin, was admonished by his priest and publicly refused communion for his support of the bill. And instead of this being met with support in the Catholic community, the priest has been criticised. People are very supportive of the MP. And worse than that, and this is what's really sad, I think, we don't know for sure, but it looks like some of the things coming out about his bishop are that he's not supporting him in this decision. So we do see this, don't we? If you just had more Bishop Strickland, if you, like you say, if you just had more priests, more bishops of courage with backbone, then things would look a lot different.
Things would look a lot different. And, when I was in Rome, I visited the catacombs of St. Calixtus, and just seeing all the martyrs, all the martyred popes, their places, their niches where they were buried, we would have martyrs. If we had the entire Bishops' Conference of England opposing this man and refusing Holy Communion and laying down some excommunications and some interdicts, there would likely be some martyrdoms, some imprisonment. And I think as Catholics, we have to ask ourselves, do we believe in the sanctity of life? And do we believe in the Trinity and the Nicene Creed and the gospel of Jesus Christ to the point where we are willing to see our cardinals and bishops and priests martyred, and then perhaps even ourselves? Because if if the European bishops went against the culture of death in Europe, there would no doubt be a persecution of the church.
Yeah, and we're English. We should be. This should not be a surprise to us.
Yeah.
You know,
was the one. Yeah.
Listen, if you've just joined us, we're live with Taylor Marshall, who has very kindly agreed to come and chat with us following his recent trip to Rome, and to join us discussing this article published by Diane Montagna yesterday, which you can see linked here, showing that Traditionis Custodes was not supported by the bishops, that actually there was generally a sense that we should leave things as Pope Benedict XVI had allowed under Summorum Pontificum. But that isn't what happened. So if you'd like to comment or ask questions, please do so. I'm going to take a quick look at these and jump over to Gavin, who's been listening very carefully, and say, Gavin, we have Taylor Marshall with us for about another 20 minutes. So get your comments in, get your questions in. And I know Gavin has been looking forward to you joining us and would like to pick your brains a little further.
I'd like to raise three things, I think. We know that Pope Leo is a very competent diplomat. He's not going to do anything very quickly. But it did seem to me there were three areas that would need dealing with. One was the Latin Mass. The other is who's in charge of the dicasteries. We'd expect Tuccio and Roche to be dealt with. If they're not, he's not the man we think he is. I think there's a third element, which is the Abu Dhabi Declaration, because along with the culture of death, we're surrounded in certainly in Britain and in Europe with the Islamic problem, and we can't deal with the Islamic problem for as long as we have the shadow of Pope Francis telling us that this diversity is willed by God, and then we have the problem too in the Catechism that the notion that Allah is actually the same as Yahweh, which is an enormously problematic confusion that needs to be sorted out. But if we go back, I'm surprised that Pope Leo hasn't done something already. And so to take Taylor's point, who leaked it? We probably don't know that, but we can ask, what should Pope Leo do about it? And it seems to me that it'd be really quite important that he, in The Sound of Music, there's this line, how do you solve a problem like Maria? The lyric now is, how do you solve a problem like the legacy of Pope Francis? It would have been better, I'm sure he'd have preferred to have done it by allowing things to drift into the past. But now he's been presented with a crisis. And I would have thought when he comes back from holiday, we have to assume that he's going to pick it up and deal with it. And we would hope very much indeed that he'll deal with it by revoking Traditionis Custodes. Having done that, of course, we know that in September he's going to revisit the heads of the dicasteries. And again, we know what we need from him. And as Taylor said, the jury's still out, but we're hoping. And then I think that the Abu Dhabi thing is there. But the big positive thing is going to be his promise to deal with AI. Now, that's not an urgent matter for the unity of the church or our comfort as Catholics, but it's certainly one of the most important things on the horizon in terms of dealing with where we get our information from, how we test reality, how do we know what's true. What I'm hoping is that the Catholic Church might return to some form of sort of medieval situation by which it offers imprimaturs to truth. So if you want to know whether this thing is truth, ask Rome, ask the Catholic Church, ask can it authenticate? Did this person say this thing when it comes to issues of religion or philosophy or politics? So at some point, that's something to be grasped in the future. But for the moment, the priority with some urgency is he going to reinvigorate Catholic confidence by dealing with Francis's lie? Is he going to deal with the dicasteries as we hope? And can he do something to help us reorganize our theological coherence when it comes to the problem of Islam? Because that's also urgent, at least in terms of the next few years.
I heartily agree with all 3 points. I think in the United States, our immigration problem is partly Islamic, but not in general. And being in Europe and seeing, I was amazed just being in Rome. 5 years ago in Rome, every single waiter and staff person was an Italian. This time, I was surprised that in Rome, it wasn't that way. These were not young Italian men serving us at restaurants and at the airport. So just in 5 years, I've noticed a shift even in Rome, and the immigration situation. I can't remember which document it was. Y'all might know, but Pope Francis said that we should welcome Muslims into our countries. Do you remember which document that was?
No, but I remember the immediate crisis in my head, what the implications were.
And it's just like, wow, and then also just the Abu Dhabi document, and the ecumenical center that was created under the guise of Abu Dhabi. I call it the Ecumenical Epcot Center. It's just sort of this cheesy theme park of a synagogue, a mosque, and a Catholic church. That needs to be addressed. And Pope Leo is not a European, and he's probably not just as most of Americans are not as aware of the influx of Islam into Europe. So he might be a little slower on that one. I don't know. I think the appointments, I'm kind of internally wait till the fall when we see the appointments. Obviously, the most important appointments are, who is the Secretary of State? Is it going to continue to be Parolin? That might be the most important decision. Secondly, who is going to head up the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith? Is it going to be Fernandez? I have from a very good source that Fernandez will be out. He's going to be gone.
Which is so really important.
Important.
And then probably the next most important, especially as regard the liturgy, will be the dicastery for divine worship.
Yeah.
And, your favorite Cardinal Roche, who will succeed him. And then also probably, who is working in the dicastery for bishops as well. But when those names are announced, I think we will have a very clear understanding of the trajectory of the pontificate of Pope Leo. So really, I think everyone should be humble and be patient and wait for those, because, personnel is really probably the biggest indicator of the trajectory of where things will go for at least the next 5 years. And if there's someone like Parolin or Fernandez stays in place, it's really hard to continue to be optimistic past that.
I think Roche, though, it wouldn't bother me if Roche stayed in place.
Yeah.
And that's mainly because he's pretty useless. No, and that's the thing. He has hurt people, but I think that pain comes from Francis. It was Francis pushing it forward, and Roche was the man who'd do it. And what we've seen about Roche over the years is that he is a vicar of Bray. He blows with the wind. When Benedict was there, he was all for Summorum Pontificum, and then when Pope Francis came through, let's face it, the motu proprio and the subsequent clarifications were pretty incompetent from him. And that really, that's what I'd like to see addressed, is the lack of theological competence that we saw under Francis. I remember, who's the guy with the funny hat? Coco Palmerio. Do you remember him? Oh, yeah. He was rolled out, wasn't he, to defend Fratelli Tutti, I don't know, or Maurice Letizia, one of the horrendous things. And he didn't even turn up to his own press conference. Do you remember that? It really was an absolute clown show under Francis. And they all seem to be much more interested in their drug-fueled homosexual parties than, preaching the gospel. And that's really what strikes me about it. It really does seem, just watching Leo, that he is someone who believes, Taylor. Do you know what I mean? He really does seem to be someone who's sincere in his faith. And I think he's got an extremely difficult job. But please God, we'll start to see him put the important things right. And I agree, Tucho's got to go.
Taylor, can I just ask quickly before you go, what do you think we do about Francis' reputation? So one of the things we had to deal with when we did our broadcast was, do we say, has the Pope lied to us? Because you can use, much politer words, dissemble. But the fact is, there are harsher, there are a range of views about Francis's character and his motivation. We can't see into his heart. We don't know what he repented of. It's not for us to judge him. But nonetheless, there is the issue of the extent to which we're realistic about the reputation of a pope who who bullied, was consumed by revenge, set out to make examples of people who particularly offended him, didn't appear to be big on forgiveness, had some very weird prejudices, including the mistaking traditional piety for rigidity. To what extent can the church tell the truth about Francis? Do we have to wait 10 years, 20 years? Can we tell it now because he's been exposed through this leak? Where on the scale of telling the truth about the Pope and dealing with the reputation of Francis is Leo likely, or would you advise, if you were advising him, would you say, well, this would be the best way of dealing with it? We're back to your question, who leaked it and why? Someone's bouncing Leo into taking tough action, aren't they?
Well, and the next question, Gavin, is what else shall be leaked?
Right.
Is this a one and done, or are there another 12 leaked documents that will be coming forth? I've spoken to people of the highest authority who say that the way Amoris Laetitia was written and pushed through was contrary to the way any papal document has ever done. It was manhandled. It was aggressive. The dicastery for the doctrine of the faith was not consulted. So there are other oddities in the pontificate of Pope Francis. There's also now these stories coming out that he was seeking psychological treatment. So there are things there, and I suspect that Pope Leo doesn't want to be the one who brings the hammer down on the man who made him a cardinal and his immediate successor. We do have an example in history where Pope Honorius was declared anathema by Pope Leo. It was either Leo II or Leo III. But I looked that up, and I believe it happened decades after Honorius. So it wasn't the immediate papal successor to Honorius that declared him anathema. But we do have that example in church history. We also have the cadaver synod. That's another option in our church history. So there are examples of successors, papal successors, who bring about condemnation, clarification, and even anathemas against their predecessors. I suspect that will happen. I don't know if it'll happen in the next 10 or 20 years, but when you look at just the corpus of sayings and teachings and actions, it's very hard for me, and again, I might be extremely biased, but it's very hard for me to see how Pope Francis left a positive impact through his papacy. He talked about making a mess. He even said early in his papacy, maybe I'll be the one that causes a schism in the church. Who speaks like this?
Yeah.
It's problematic. So
Not
there's
popes.
definitely that part of our tradition, and I think it'll happen.
Yeah. No, I pulled that up a moment ago. Ronnie King, your question was similar to Gavin's, slightly different perhaps, but along the same lines. Ronnie King's just saying, I have lots of people I know who have Francis blinkers on, and everything they hear, they basically, it seems to me this person saying they think he's great. How do you explain this to people? I mean, I would want to begin by saying I think a focus on one pope is not really the response. It's a focus on truth that matters, isn't it?
Yeah, the hard thing is, when we're having conversations with people, 99% of the people you're speaking with have never read one line of the Vatican II documents, and they've never read one line of any of the papal documents of Pope Francis, right? So when it comes to the actual texts and the teachings, most people are entirely ignorant. What they go off is, he's the Pope of mercy, he loves the poor, all the sound bites. So yeah. I think you just have to recognize that we're not dealing with an actual discussion on facts, teaching, doctrine, morality. We're dealing with media memes of who Pope Francis is. And honestly, those people who have not studied those things, I mean, they can be in good faith and great holy people, but when you look at Catholic dogma and Catholic morality and the intellectual battles that have been fought over time on the hypostatic union all the way up to transubstantiation or justification, it takes real hard work to get those things done. So, unless someone is really reading the documents of Vatican II or reading the encyclicals and exhortations of Pope Francis, how do you even begin to engage in those conversations? It's very difficult.
It seems to me that really the clearest thing was that came out of Pope Francis's pontificate was this hermeneutic of rupture that Pope Benedict spoke of. He really did seem to be, these people and the people that he surrounded himself with and took advice from and promoted were people who believed that at Vatican II, a completely new institution was born. And the old institution and what the old institution taught was no longer valid, and they were moving in a new direction. And I never thought that could happen. It really did shock me that he was allowed to carry on with that from the moment that he started washing, women prisoners, Muslim prisoners' feet at the Mandatum, through to all the nonsensical, the Amazonian Synod and Pachamama and the whole gamut of it. It just didn't. I can remember watching you years and years ago, Taylor. Just doing before you were really famous on YouTube or whatever. You just were doing your little catechetical thing, teaching people. You had just St. Thomas Institute, teaching people the faith. It was brilliant. It was really, really good. And all that, like you were defending Francis to begin with, I think like we all were, I was a bit as well. And then you just suddenly you were like, oh no, this is terrible. And it was for a lot of us, it was a rude awakening that the enemies really have infiltrated the church. Obviously, you wrote the book on it, and we were in serious trouble.
I also thought this would never happen. I mean, that's why I wrote Infiltration. I'm like, how could this happen? How could all these things, this constellation, occur in the sky over the church? How could this happen? And we're still not out of it. I think we're still very much part of an infiltration. And I think the church in the UK, the church in the United States of America needs help. And I hope that Pope Leo is the guiding star. But we lived through 12 years of Francis Bergoglio, and I'm honestly, my wife and I were talking about it after the death of Pope Francis. It's like, after the 12 years of Pope Francis, we're still Catholic. I hope I'm not bragging or boasting. I'm boasting the Lord, but I think I'm a better Catholic. My prayer life is better. Our family is Catholic. Despite everything that happened in Rome, in the Vatican, the work of the Holy Spirit and the graces of the sacraments and the traditional piety and prayers and devotion of the church still work.
I think you can make an argument. Sorry, big one. I think you can make an argument for saying that actually Francis can be turned out to be a blessing for us, because one of the things he did was to accelerate the whole process of disclosure. All these things were there; these elements were already within the church in a latent way, kind of like dry rot, just bringing the place down. What Francis did was, in this period of 12 years, make it very difficult converts, but he brought the whole thing to the surface. And by doing so has given us a much clearer sense of what needs dealing with as we move forward. I think the problem for Leo particularly is going to be that the more we tell the truth about Francis, the more damage we do to the papacy. So we might get a short-term satisfaction out of saying, well, we've exposed the rascal, but there's a long-term damage to the office itself. And as Catholics, I think that we'd want to be very careful about that trade-off. It's not one we can afford to get wrong. So I can see that's one of the reasons why Leo might want just let Francis disappear behind and then slowly reconfigure things in a careful way, particularly, as you say, because personnel is policy. It's going to take a while to replace a generation of bishops, but that's one of the things that needs doing.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Well, thanks for joining us. We have to say goodbye to Dr. Taylor Marshall, who has joined us today. You'll notice a few moments ago I brought up an image of Infiltration, which is one of the many books you've written, Dr. Taylor, and here is the institute you mentioned. You can find this St. Thomas Institute? The new St. Thomas Institute. There we go.
NSTI.
NSTI. And see what classes are on there, and your website and your podcast, of course. You're a busy man over there in Texas, but thank you for joining us. Well, we had Taylor Marshall on our show, and we heard the words, and Gavin Ashenden, and we heard the words, we've got some good Jesuits, and Pope Francis was a blessing. So who'd have thunk it, eh?
Well, I think Taylor leaked the document, because the thing is, the only person who really stands to gain from this is Taylor Marshall. He was blamed for the whole debacle. So whose interest is it to have this guy? Taylor, I suspect you having a hand in this.
So I have heard for a number of years, a mutual friend of ours wrote me yesterday saying, the document and the questionnaires were positive, and I've heard that for the last 5 years, that what Francis received was overwhelmingly positive, but I never saw it. I didn't know what it was. And then Diane Montagna leaked it yesterday. So it confirms what I had heard. Because obviously many people in the Curia had seen this document. It was discussed in the presence of Pope Francis. Diane Montagna says at one moment, Francis took it out of the hands of someone and said, I want to read it. So clearly it was circulated, it was read, it was discussed. So people knew about it. And so that rumor has been leaked out over the last 5 years, but to actually read the document and to see what was actually said, and it's way more positive than I would have imagined. If it's an authentic document, I did not leak it. The first time I saw it was when everybody else saw it. But I am kind of relieved. Maybe people will stop blaming me for being the cause of Traditionis Custodes. I think
so you put that on Twitter yesterday.
Yeah, I think
stop blaming me now.
Rorate Celi, I think, maybe has circulated that idea that Pope Francis was subscribed to my YouTube channel and got very angry and decided to write a motu proprio to ban the traditional Latin Mass. But I don't think that's the case. If it were the case, it'd be even worse and even more petty than we could have ever imagined.
He actually was, yeah.
And we want to let it be publicly here that there's no evidence he watched Unscripted either. So nothing's our fault.
I had a friend yesterday who said to me that he had lunch with 2 cardinals last week, and they said they didn't have a clue who they were voting for. So when it comes to who is Pope Leo, I think that probably is the truth of it. And let's hope that the Holy Spirit had a big hand in it in the end, and we got the right man. So I think
let me add this. I was talking to Cardinal Mueller about it, and he said that many during the conclave, and even till when Prevost was elected, many of the cardinals did not know that he was an American.
Wow.
And I was like, wait, you're telling me during the conclave, people are voting for Prevost and they did not know that he was an American citizen? And he said, yes. Wow, interesting.
They thought they were getting a new the liberation theologian from South America. That's really funny.
Yeah.
Well, let's watch this space. Continue to watch this space. Continue to watch Dr. Taylor Marshall. Do check out his website and his work. And please continue to watch us, Catholic Unscripted, and check out our new website, catholicunscripted.com, and pick up a membership to see some exclusive content there, articles and videos. But for now, we'll leave it there, and hopefully you'll join us once again. Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for taking the time today, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. I'm Katherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
And thank you, Dr. Taylor Marshall.
Here.